Good morning. Welcome to the 20th edition of the Marrakech International Film Festival. My name is Andrea Picard, and I'm a curator here. Rather, I'm part of the programming team. And it's such a pleasure and an honor to be moderating this conversation with the phenomenal TILDA Swinton today. TILDA Swinton, as you all know her, she is one of the great performers, but she's also a screenwriter and a producer, and in my opinion, one of the great film artists of our time. Please help me in welcoming TILDA Swinton. This is just a reminder to please turn your cell phones off. Thank you. Sort of loud. TILDA, thank you for coming back to Marrakech. You've been here a number of times, and I remember last year was quite, it was a poignant moment. You received the Tribute Award, and there was a surprise at the ceremony. Your daughter Honor was there to give you that prize. And it's one of the special moments that I've experienced in Marrakech. And I'm wondering, why do you return to this festival?
I love this festival. I love the people who run the festival. And the films are extraordinary. I mean, literally extraordinary. There's nowhere else so far to find this kind of portal into a kind of filmmaking from a corner, or not even corner, but a section of the globe that doesn't often get this kind of attention. But mainly, I would say, I love the audience here. There's something about the youth of the audience here and the cine literacy of the audience here there's a purity, and yeah, I love it. I'll come again.
Wonderful, we love having you here. And I agree that the audience is very open and curious and generous. But to go back again to last year, you were also here with Joanna Hoggs, the Eternal Daughter. Joanna's on our jury. We're very happy to have her. And in that film, there was something that I felt that was so extraordinarily powerful because the film is great. You play this dual role, but it felt imbued with a lifetime's work of trust and love.
The Eternal Daughter is a very particular, talking of portals, it's a very particular kind of zone for me, because Joanna Hogg is the first filmmaker I ever worked with. She's actually, apart from people I'm related to by blood, the person I've known longest in my life. We first met when I was 10, she was 11, on the first day of a really traumatic school experience, which lasted for nearly a decade, but we kept each other afloat. I mean, in more ways than one. And when I look back on the conversations that led to The Eternal Daughter, which is the last film that we made together, it's just opened in the UK. I mean, it is fresh off the press, if you like. And it's a film that I made with the first filmmaker I ever worked with, the last film I ever made. It is also a film made out of conversations that we've been having since I was 10. It's about our sort of magical confusion about our mothers and the mystery of our mothers. And so to work with someone who you know that well, who you've worked with for that long, through all those decades and all those evolutionary turns is quite phenomenal. And for many years I said that the first filmmaker I ever worked with was Derek Jarman. And then I remembered, no, the first filmmaker I ever worked with was Joanna. And I don't just mean her graduation film, Caprice, which we made in '84, I think. But I mean the conversations we were having when we were children were, I believe, filmmakers' conversations. You know, we both were very alienated and observant. And to share this kind of observational position with someone and sort of pick it apart and put it all together again over so long is really, it's phenomenal.
We actually have a clip of Caprice, which we would like to start with, and then we will follow that up by The Eternal Daughter to give a sense of that trajectory. and breadth. That is quite a trajectory, I would say.
It's so strange because I look like members of my family through both of those clips. I look very like my son in the first one, and a little like my daughter, and very like my mother in the second one.
And speaking of family, Honor is in the two souvenir films, and so it is like this intertwining of family and friends, and I think artistic alliances.
Yeah, there was a very interesting task in The Eternal Daughter, because for those of you who haven't seen it, the women in the souvenir films, Julie and Rosalind Hart, are played by me. I play the mother, but the daughter, who's the protagonist of the souvenir films, is played by my daughter. And so when I came to play Julie 25 years later, I was also playing my daughter 25 years into the future. It was a trip, I think you could call it, and exactly the kind of trip I'm really interested in, not just in terms of working with these alliances, and Joanna being the really important foundational one, but also with the material of family. I'm just pretty much besotted with that now, is working with the grain of real human relationships.
And would you say the root of that also came from working with Derek Jarman? Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, Derek, there's no way I would be doing what I'm doing at all if it hadn't been for Derek. I think even my roots with Joanna, and he also was a great mentor for Joanna as a young filmmaker when we were all together in London in the 80s. But the way he worked set my course, the way he allowed me to develop my practice. I don't know where else I would have been able to do that. I think that, Joanna may say that because she then went through film school where the way in which she wants to work wasn't necessarily supported. Well, I got the fast track because I was working with Derek from 1985. 9 years I worked with him. We made, I think, 7 films together. And so by the time he left the building, I was really addicted to this collective, kind of co-authored practice, which I've now been able to weave through and really start to develop with Joanna, and also particularly with Apichatpong Estetical, and also now with Bong Joon-ho.
Wonderful. You work with the best people, TILDA.
So honored.
And they're working with the best.
I'm so honored.
I recently rewatched a number of Derek Jarman films. He's also someone who's very important to me, also as an activist and a painter. And the films exude such a sense of freedom. And, I think some people find them very, not aggressive, but very frontal. They're putting it all out there. But for me, the predominant feeling is of freedom. Did you have that sense when you were making the work?
That's so interesting what you say about people feeling confronted by the work, and what immediately comes to my mind is maybe it's possible to be both, and that the reason they were able to be so confronting was because there was this freedom in the practice. Derek was, first and foremost, he was a poet, he was a writer of great diaries and prose, he was an activist, as we know, but he was first and foremost a painter. So he knew what it was to work alone. He made films for company, not just the company of his fellows, but also the company of the audience. And that's why I felt so at home there. And so making this work was such a feeling of security and license that it was possible to be confronting. And I personally think that's the formula. I think that feeling of home in the work, in the working practice, makes it possible. Well, who was it? Flaubert, or I think, said, be calm and cozy. I don't know. I'm not translating properly. In your life, that you may be wild and revolutionary in your art, and that was Derek's way, I think, of being able to be as truthful and as in your face as the work was able to be, because we made it. And by the way, we made it in this beautiful sort of amniotic fluid of not really caring what anybody who didn't want it thought. We knew we had a connection with the audience. We were making it very much for us, which meant making it very much for them. And there was this absolute collusion, and anybody who didn't want it, including, the film establishment of the day in London, we just didn't care.
And of course, now there's a new audience for this work. Yeah. And how is it that you negotiate, let's say, your more commercial work with your more experimental work and the cross-pollination of those audiences, which is also a magical thing?
Well, I mean, I smile because for me, any commercial work is experimental for me, and everything else is home. So I've been really fortunate to have some adventures in worlds of filmmaking that I never would have thought that I would be able to go into. When Derek died, I was a bit high and dry because I'd worked in this way. I didn't know it was possible to work with anybody else in this way. And slowly, people start. I mean, one of the great advantages of making films over 9 years is that the work is out there and people begin to get a sense of what they might want to do with you. And so these invitations came, and there were a few that I was able to pick up very happily with people I really wanted to be around. And a couple of them, the first studio film I made was with Francis Lawrence. Constantine was an experimental film. He was approaching it as an experimental film. And the same is true, actually, the first time I worked with David Fincher. He was completely throwing himself out of the window on all this tech, which I'm always really interested in, on Benjamin Button. And then, I just was happy to work with him on the Killer. They are all, and Andrew Abrams, who made the Narnia film, he said to me, I don't know what I'm doing. I've never made a live action film. I've only been an animator before. Will you come with me on this mad adventure, which is truly what it felt like. And I was very interested in that. But they always felt like what I call away games. They were always me packing a small bag to go and see what I could see. And as a film geek, to go into the studio system, even for a moment, has always been really interesting for me, to go into those big, old, hallowed halls and see why they may or may not still be hallowed is just really interesting. But coming back home and working with Joanna or working with Joey in a much more kind of self-determined way, that's peace.
But I could see how there would be magic in both worlds. Right?
There's magic everywhere because it's all about the people. It's possible. It's not the houses. The houses don't hold the spirit. It's the people. And there are ways, I still believe there are ways of making truly radical studio work. There are obstacles that need to be negotiated, but as long as the people, and as long as there's fellowship, as long as they're not isolated and get beaten down, that's always going to be something to look forward to.
I'm also I'm a programmer of experimental cinema, and that word is not a dirty word. I have to convince people there are various forms of experimentation through all the art forms and in the ways in which we live our lives as well. And so I think that was very beautifully put.
Well, I feel in my I still feel like I'm making, Joanna and I both felt when we made The Eternal Daughter that it was our first film, which is such a privilege to have that experience after working for so long. But in the length of time that I started working in the middle 80s, and the whole landscape of filmmaking has gone, it's always going through these great, that's the story, isn't it? I remember when COVID, when we were all locked down, one of the first things that I did, we were all looking for our favorite films and favorite books at that time when we were hunkering down. And the first book I kind of went for was the first half of Michael Powell's brilliant autobiography. And I realized, apart from the fact that he's like a sort of total household god for my family, apart from that, the reason I think I was looking for it was like a dog looking for some some sustenance, was his biography is really the biography of cinema. You know, he started working with Rex Ingram's in the south of France in silent cinema. And when I read through the passages that he accounts, the coming of sound, total nightmare crisis. Everything crashed. All the studios couldn't operate anymore. All the cinemas couldn't operate it anymore. It was one of the moments when people started talking rubbish about cinema being dead. And that was the first opportunity for cinema to adapt, as she always does. And then there was the opportunity with the coming of color, same thing. You know, off she goes, she reinvents, and then the coming of television, and then the coming of video, and then the coming of DVD, and now streaming. You know, and then a shutdown for COVID. It's never going to really affect cinema except to push her a little further. And one of the things that's so fascinating now is the audience. Now, my son, who's 26 and a real props master, filmmaker, and really, really interested in cinema, he and his friends, they go to the cinema all the time. They'll see anything and everything. And he said the other night, you know, COVID was really good for cinema. And he's talking from his generation. I mean, the audiences are getting younger and younger and less snobbish, which is so important. And more their tastes are more and more Catholic with cinema, and more cine literate. So it's a good moment.
I feel there is that combination of cinema literacy and openness.
Yeah.
And we've already seen the canon explode also, but I think tastes and changing and just, and we were talking about this earlier, that I think that streaming is actually pushing people back into the cinemas because they understand that it's a different experience. It's a communal experience. We being here together today is very different.
Yeah.
And just as filmmaking is a collaboration, film going is as well, where you have those dialogues in real life. You put your phone away, you have that time with the art form.
Well, I mean, it's one of the things we all noticed with the big lockdown. There were 4 things that people across the globe, not just film nerds like us, said they missed. They missed friends and family. They missed traveling. They missed live music, and they missed cinema. Those were the 4 things that people really started to value properly. And the thing is, cinema, I think, is becoming clear, can be everything. And when Apichatpong were at Sethikal's film Memoria, when we were so grateful to Neon, who put it out in the States, we asked to put it out only on the big screen. There would never be any DVDs made. It was not possible to stream it for a very, very long time, or certainly within the States. And it went on a tour, one cinema at a time, around the United States of America, and people came. They did that thing I remember using in our conversations about why this might be a good idea. I remember saying, you know, rock music can tell us this. You know, you love a band, you love their latest album, you've listened to it a million times on Spotify, or you've got the DVD, the CD. But when they come to your town, are you not going to go and see them because you know the music? It's just not possible to not value the live experience of cinema in the way in which I think this younger audience and more savvy audience is beginning to do.
I may have been a groupie on that tour. Did a couple of cities.
And people went, didn't they?
Absolutely, they did.
They did the thing.
And they brought it back to New York several times for several runs.
I think there's a magic also in the event. You know, you hear Nick Cave is coming, and you buy that ticket maybe in 8 months in advance, and you stick it on your fridge with a magnet, and you mark off the days on your calendar, and you go. And people did that with Memoria. It's really, really thrilling.
We're going to get back into Memoria in a little bit, but before we get there, I also want to talk about the renewed interest in Orlando, which was a big role for you. And Sally Potter's film was recently restored last year, and more people have seen it. There have been several Orlando films. The Ulrika Ottinger, Paul B. Preciado's film came out this year, and it's part of the discourse. And I feel like it's maybe even more relevant now than it was Can you say a bit about Orlando?
Yes, Orlando, I can't believe, is 30 years old, and whenever I see it, it feels fresher than ever. And certainly in terms of the context in which it was made, but we're talking about a book written in 1928, which was, The Beacon by Virginia Woolf, her masterpiece. That holds the key, really, to an absolutely supersonic. I suppose what I'm thinking is when we tried to raise money for Orlando, Sally Potter and Christopher Shepard and I, when we thought 5 years was a long time, I now realize, having worked with Luca Guadagnino and all sorts of people, that's not long. I Am Love took us 12 years. And actually, I just made a film last year with my friend Cynthia Beat that we started talking about in 1986. So I have no problem with the long gestation. For me, it's grace. But when we were asking people to support this film, and they said, what's it about? And we said, well, it's about class and history and boundarylessness and England and internationalism and democracy and a kind of radical project. And they said, yeah, but what's it about? And we would say, well, it's about class and England and internationalism. And then the whole question of sex change, which, to be honest with you, I don't really think is in Orlando the book, and not really that interesting in the film, because I don't think Virginia Woolf and Sally and I are not particularly interested in, gender bending. My fantasy about Orlando the book is that if it had been maybe another 100 pages, Orlando might have turned into a spaniel or a bottle of water, or it's about freedom and it's about boundarylessness. But now, the dialogue is so fresh and so important. The whole idea of binariness is becoming properly dissolved. And yeah, Orlando, Virginia Woolf first, Sally Potter and me next. We've been, pushing that up the hill, and it's found a moment.
We have a tiny clip of Orlando. Jacqueline, si c'est possible. Merci. We're both wearing collars, Orlando's. Something that I wanted to get back to in these long gestating projects, people of course know you as a performer because you're so present and in so many different films. Your behind the scenes work is equally important, I think, and in developing these projects, in fundraising, in script writing. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, I'm always having to apologize for my discomfort in being described as an actor, because I never intended to be an actor. I'm really not interested in acting, and it is a sort of, and I also know very little about it, and I don't want to know anything about it. My own taste, if you like, is for non-performance. I can't stand the performative performance. I really can't stand it. I'm not a creature of the theatre. And I think there's can be a slightly unhealthy relationship between the theatre and the cinema. And again, I'm speaking as someone who loves to watch something new. And it's very difficult when you've got a lot of acting going on to get past it into something real. And so my real interest is in the frame. And in working in conversation with filmmakers to get them the opportunity to get that frame and fill it with what they want to. And sometimes I'm involved, they want me in the frame, and sometimes they don't, but I'm still there doing what I can to make it possible for that film to exist and that frame to be available to them. I can already feel I've embarrassed myself by saying what I've said. But it's true, I have to admit, because I can't, I'm not a good liar.
We appreciate honesty. You've worked with such different filmmakers as well, many of whom have really strong visions and visual styles. So getting back to the frame and the mise en scène, when I think of you in a Wes Anderson film and how you perfectly fit his world. And then the man from London, a Bella Tarr, who has an aesthetic that could not be more different. Can you talk about embodying those mise en scènes?
Yeah, it's a particular sort of private pleasure of mine, and it's such grace in my life that these extraordinary artists whose work some of them whose work I know really well before I even meet them, like Pedro Almodovar or Bella Tarr or Wes Anderson or Jim Jarmusch, all filmmakers whose work I really worshipped and felt I knew very well. I knew the atmosphere, the different, completely distinct worlds that they drum up, and to be invited into them, it's like there's an element of cosplay about it, because one is stepping in, and what you see of my work with Joanna and Joey Apichatpong and Derek is very close to my own kind of temperature and my own bathwater, if you like. But to step into those worlds always feels to me, having said what I've said about acting, it does require a level of disguise and a level of, going into the slipstream of somebody else's energy, somebody else's country, somebody else's entire aesthetic. And so it is a sort of game I play with myself. I do remember when I worked with Bella Tarr, I could not believe it. He would set up, because he'll set up these incredibly long takes, and we would set them up over the course of a day with the music in situ, and the camera, who is the star, of course, the camera is always the star, moving. And then the point would come when one would step into the frame. And I remember the first time I looked at any playback, I could not believe that I was in a Bella Tarr frame. It was such a thrill. I'm such a geek. And the same is true to a certain extent with the others I've mentioned, to be in how could I fit into a Wes Anderson film or for that matter, a Jim Jarmusch film? But they've been so gracious and wanted to play.
In fact, I was very lucky to have the conversation with Jim here last year, and we talked a lot about Only Lovers Left Alive, and the seeds of that film started in relationships that he made at the festival in Marrakech, and he loved working with you and how you fit his world. And so we have a tiny clip of Only Lovers Left Alive that we will show.
Shot in Tangier, of course.
Yeah, but not this clip, unfortunately.
Okay. Detroit, then.
Of course, for those of you who haven't seen the film, TILDA plays a 300-year-old vampire.
3,000 years.
3,000, pardon me. Extra zero, hence the popsicle blood. As we don't have too much time left, we want to ensure that there's plenty of time for those of you in the audience. I would like to spend a little bit of time with Apichatpong and your experience working on Memoria. He also is someone who works very methodically and thoughtfully and visually, thinking about the frame and senses. I would like to show 3 photographs that he sent specifically for this talk, just to give an idea of the framing and you in the frame. So Jacqueline, if you could show the 3 photographs from Memoria. I love this, of you framed, looking at framed artwork. I don't know if you want to comment this photograph.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I value about Apichatpong's work is his dedication to atmosphere. That's what he's setting up in every shot. It's very diligent, it's very careful, but it has to remain fluid. And so, for example, we work with improvisation. There's a framework of a screenplay, but the dialogue, as with Joanna Hogg, is entirely improvised. And I love this way of working because it means that one's brain is fully alive. But the thing that he's very attendant to is movement in the frame. So if one has to walk in a frame, the timing of one's walk has to fit It's almost geometrical, it's almost mathematical. Has to, you know, if I had to walk, if you were the camera and I had to walk across this stage, that's what we would spend time doing, figuring out the kind of meeting out the rhythm of the movement in the frame. It has something to do with dance, in a way, but it's almost like his frame. You know, when you put bubble mixture. You know, when you do those people in squares with those huge bubbles and there's a massive kind of soap surface. It's like his frame is like that. It has to have a kind of tension in it. And when we look back at the material, if it hasn't got that tension, we move on and do it again. And it's only when we feel that it's got this sort of slightly bouncy tension, which is to do with what moves through the frame. And that could be, by the way, things that you can't control, like birds coming in, or going out, or bees, or it's all about trying to get that surface tension.
And so how involved were you with the framing of that film?
Well, we kind of figured it out together. Sayombu, his masterly DP, who we've worked with, I mean, I've worked with him also with Luca Guadagnino. We made Suspiria together. We kind of work it out together. I mean, it makes me feel that they can allow me to be just as important as a tree or a chair, and that's what I love as a performer, the feeling of democracy in the frame. That, you know, the bottle of water or your shoes are just as important as my face. And so we work that out together.
In thinking about Memoria especially, and knowing that we all fought so much to have it on the big screen, it's very much about sound, atmosphere. You get a sense of touch in the film. And now I'm just going to jump back a little bit to Luca Guadagnino's work, who is all about sensation. They're very, very different filmmakers, but somehow you're gravitating towards these sensational...
Sensationalist is the word that I remember coining with Luca when we made I Am Love, because we wanted people to be able to smell. There's this one moment in I Am Love when the person I play is walking through a idyllic landscape and smelling. She takes the branch. And we really wanted people to be able to smell it. And that's very important to him. They're immersive, both of them, in a way, in different ways, but they're both interested in you being immersed. I always remember a story I tell against myself. The great Michael Powell, who I was very fortunate enough to know at the end of his life. I remember once coming off, when we were trying to raise money for Orlando. It's a kind of very funny story. We were trying everything to raise money for this film. And in those days, believe it or not, costume films alone, let alone what they were about, nobody was interested. No. And we kept saying we wanted to make something modern in costume, and absolutely nobody could understand what that might mean. Now, of course, there's a tendency, and so there's sort of tracks in the snow. But I remember us... that somebody very kindly gave a cocktail party for us in New York where rich people were going to be invited. And I was seconded to read, in the middle of this cocktail party, sections of Orlando, the book. I don't know, we could have put a hat on the street and probably got more, but anyway, I don't think we raised $1 at that cocktail party, and there was really expensive champagne and everything. Anyway, but Michael Powell was there, and he asked me what I'd seen on the plane. His first question, what film did you see on the plane? And I said it was a film that, and he said, did you like it? And I said, no. And he said, you're wrong. It's a good film. And I said, okay, why? And he said, because it makes its own world. And any film that makes its own world is kind of crossed the line and deserves some respect. And I carried that with me ever since. And both Luca and Apichatpong make their own worlds that you dive into.
Apichatpong also sent an installation, so we're going to show a 3-minute clip. This is an outtake from Memoria, When You're Sleeping, which turned into Durmiente, which he combined with an installation that he had made with Richu Sakamoto, Async. And so we're going to show 3 minutes of that and then talk about it. So there's so many things about that that I love. This interplay between the film world and the art world, which Apichatpong has been doing, which you have been doing. He talks a lot about sleep and the cinema and dream and reverie, and that's why with the second channel, you have beams of light that we receive in the cinema, almost being enlightened. And then your relationship to sleep in one of the performances that you've done, The Maybe, and I thought of that instantly when I saw this, and I don't know if you had discussed that with Apichatpong or if this just came intuitively.
It's a strange sort of symbiotic link between us. I've always been very interested in sleep and dream, and that's in a way, I mean, it sounds so facile and banal to mention it because I think one can very often relate cinema to dream, but it's a very practical business for me. And I made an installation called The Maybe. The first time I made it was in 1995, and I've made it several times since. Made it in London at the Serpentine Gallery, and then in Rome at the Museo Baracco, and then most recently in New York at MoMA. And it's actually an installation that I intend to keep making, but I never announce it. And it's me in a glass box asleep for whatever the duration is, whether it's 8 hours or 24, and then it vanishes. And I'd already made it by the time I met Joey. I met him. Well, of course, I met him through his films, and the first time we made contact was after I'd seen Tropical Malady in Cannes, and I was privileged to be on the jury there, and I remember during the screening, not only being transported, of course, but being absolutely, like, it was a complete coup de foudre because there's this one moment, I was with Quentin Tarantino, who's the president of our jury, and he got very worried because he thought that the projectionist had swapped the cans, and we had the wrong reel in. But actually, that's Apichatpong just taking you out of a whole sort of vernacular conversation about a relationship between two boys, and then you're in the jungle, and you stay in the jungle, and it is like you've fallen asleep. And so when we first started talking to each other, I think I wrote something about his cinema, and he contacted me after that. And I think in that piece that I wrote, I talked about this sort of, shared, not even fascination, but shared comfort with the idea of cinema being a dreamscape. And for example, in that piece, it was very important to us that I really fall asleep, and I really fall asleep there. And we waited, and I remember we did several takes. And, at the end of quite a long time, someone would sort of wiggle my toe and say, "Are you asleep?" And I'd say, "No, it didn't work." "Okay, go again." And 6 minutes. Yeah.
I hope it was after a long day of shooting.
It was after a long day of shooting. I mean, sleeping is not a problem for me. I go there very easily.
Do you do that often? Do you write to filmmakers?
I like to reach out to anybody whose work moves me. I think it's a really important practice for all of us to do. And I think those artists in the audience, or actually anybody in the audience who's been the beneficiary of this kind of, it's not even encouragement, but it's just fellowship. It's so wonderful when anybody but a fellow artist reaches out to you and says, "I hear you." And especially if it's someone who says, "I hear you, let's play." And we became, I did that, that's how I met Wes Anderson, actually. I think I wrote to him. Again, just, I love Darjeeling Limited, that's all. But with Joey, I had a very strong sense that we were fellow travelers. He reminds me, I mean, I don't want this to sound reductive, but he's such a brother to Derek Jarman, and his work and the way he approaches it is so close, and so it's so familiar. And I feel in many ways. It's so funny to be talking now, Andrea, because, you know, worked for so long, and yet I feel the work I'm making now is so close to the work I made at the very beginning with Joanna and Derek, and now with Joanna and Apichatpong. And then there's all the stuff in between, which was like going to other people's parties and gleaning all sorts of fascinating insights about myself and about cinema and making very good friends, which is, you know, kind of the stuff of life.
Has there anything that has daunted you along the way?
Well, in terms of working practice, I learned early to be comfortable while working. And so I must admit that I need that. And I know not to go outside of that, which doesn't mean I don't work with new collaborators all the time. But that connection, that sort of bond of communication and that trust has to be there. So I would be daunted to approach working without that. And I'm so daunted that I'm not going to do it. I just know it wouldn't. Why would I do that? It would probably be a complete waste of space and waste of screen, because I don't know that I would be able to take myself with me. So yeah, so daunted that I don't go there. There be dragons.
You said that you've almost gone back to your origins and how you're working now. Would you go back to writing? Because I know you studied writing and...
Well, no, I mean, my embarrassment about writing is that I was always a writer who stopped writing at a certain point. And at the point when I went to university, and when I went to university and stopped writing, that's when I started performing. And I often think that every film I make, I intend to be my last. And then I can get on with doing what I'm really supposed to do, which is write. I did start writing again several years ago, and I do write sometimes essays that appear in public, but generally I write things that nobody else sees. But yeah, that whole relationship with writing has been not refreshed. It's new, because I used to write poetry more, and now I went to university as a poet, and I don't write so much poetry now, but I like to write essays, and when I work in collaboration with filmmakers who are interested in improvisation, like Joanna, it really, really delights me, because it draws on the writer in me. I mean, for example, in The Eternal Daughter, where both people, I never use the word character because it does feel like that belongs to the theatre, that concept. They are people to me, both Julie and Rosalind, and I suppose that's evidenced by the fact that they choose what they're going to say, and if they're going to say anything, and when they're going to say it, and how they're going to speak. And they speak in very different Englishes, both of those people. And that I found really just nourishing, because, as I say, it really drew on the writer in me to write Rosalind's voice, for example, moment to moment, was really thrilling, because it's an English that people don't really speak anymore. My mother spoke it, my grandmother, but her turns of phrase are kind of almost lost now.
A question about the multi-angles of your practice, I guess we could call it. We see you in films very often. We've seen you work with the fashion industry and performance work. Recently, the Pasolini piece, which I thought was fantastic. Your photographic work. Do you see this as all part of one practice?
Yeah, it's all part of one practice. And again, that's what I won't say I learned with Derek, but I was encouraged in with Derek. The artists I found when I started working in Derek's circle are all artists who, you know, will write something 1 minute and make a film the next and make a sculpture the next. I mean, it's a sort of, you know, in many ways gets sometimes denigrated as outsider art, but I claim that as a badge of honor. But that's the sort of rhythm of my working life, and always has been. And so maybe in the light of that, you can see these moments, these odd moments, which of course, ironically, are the moments that most people around the world know me for. They know me for these strange excursions into, you know, I remember once there was this beautiful moment when we were in Mexico City. I was working with Eric Zonka, a film called Julia, which I love very much. And we were shooting at night, and all these street children came around me in this square, and I couldn't think why, and we worked out that they'd all stood at the window of a television shop and watched Narnia, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, and they all came to me. And I remember my sweetheart Sandra saying, "Future Derek Jarman fans." It felt so great, yeah.
We are almost out of time. My last question to you is going to be about your arts programming, actually, because you've done several roles. You've programmed a festival with Apichatpong. You've done film programming. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that gives me great pleasure. I mean, I remember, first of all, had I maybe programmed something in Sharjah with Joey first? But anyway, there was a very happy period when I was programming a cinema in my village in the north of Scotland. There was a bingo hall, which I realized was shut down. And it was a bingo hall where all the old people used to go on a Wednesday and play bingo, but also people could check up on people, and if people didn't turn up. It was a kind of very important social hub in our village. And so I rented the bingo hall to have a cinema in. And my intention was to have a permanent cinema there. But for very boring local reasons, I wasn't able to, because somebody in the house behind it didn't want us to use their lawn if there was a fire exit. Anyway, but we did have a film festival there, and it was fantastic. My friend Mark Cousins and I programmed a film festival, actually with my children as well, because we programmed it in about 30 seconds flat. We literally wrote down on the back of an envelope our favorite DVDs, and then we projected them on the wall, and people brought deck chairs and brought cakes, and you got in free if you brought cakes for the cafe, and also you got in for free if you dressed accordingly. So if you came to see I Know Where I'm Going by Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger in a kilt, you got in for free. Or if you came to see Polanski's Vampire Killers with vampire makeup on, it was fantastic. And then the following year, we lost our theatre, and so we did a mobile cinema around the north of Scotland. We did moving cinema called The Pilgrimage, and we went to all sorts of places. Anyway, no, I love programming cinema, and I would love to run a cinema. I mean, that's what I would really love to do.
I think you would be great at it. I would come to your retrospectives. Heartbeat. We are going to take questions from the audience now. I see many hands up already. Tilda, you're going to have to help me do this.
Can we see the people? Because we can't see them.
Is it possible to put the lights up a little bit?
Thank you.
Bonjour, très heureuse d'être là dans cette magnifique conversation avec TILDA SWINTON. J'attendais vraiment ce moment. TILDA SWINTON, j'ai vu tous vos films. Ce qui me touche le plus, moi, Sharafa Shrif Hawat, cinéphile marocain. Ce qui me touche le plus, c'est que vraiment, vous, autant qu'actrice, artiste, actrice, vous possédez réellement les outils artistiques, créatifs de l'interprétation. Parce que moi, autant que cinéphile, quand je vois vos films, vos différents personnages que vous interprétez, et je préfère là personne, pas personnage, moi aussi. Je préfère personne, pas personnage que vous interprétez. Toujours, vous réussissez à m'offrir, à moi, autant que cinéphile, le fond de la personne, les émotions, les petits détails de la personne. Donc, moi, autant que cinéphile, vraiment, vous réussissez à me transmettre les personnages ou les personnes que vous interprétez. Alors, ma question, est-ce que TILDA Swinton a une préférence de travailler avec un réalisateur ou des réalisateurs, ou non, quand vous recevez un texte, un scénario, si le scénario, ça vous va, vous sentez qu'il va vous faire ressortir des émotions et tout ça, vous acceptez ce scénario. Et très heureuse d'être là aujourd'hui. En plus de ça, je dois signaler que j'adore votre engagement humain avec la cause palestinienne. Et merci beaucoup.
I understood everything except your precise question. Can anybody help me with the final question, the final countdown?
Do you prefer to work with certain filmmakers, or is it based on the text that you receive?
Yes, okay. I understand, and it's a, oh, this is what I need. Although my French was amazing just now. It's always the people for me. Always the people. Because the truth is, anybody can make a piece of work out of a written text. I mean, I have this fantasy, I don't know how to realize this, but I've always wanted to make a project when we have a written screenplay and we ask, I don't know, 5, 7 filmmakers to make a film from the same text, to show what a director does, what an interpretation is. And so for me, it's always the people, because the text is, I mean, no disrespect to the writers. I mean, the diligence that is important for screenwriting, but it's just a piece of paper that then has to get enlivened in the screen, and it gets enlivened by the people who make it. So it's really the conversation with the filmmakers.
Juste là.
Hi. First of all, I'm such a big fan of yours, and it is really with great honor that I'm talking with you. I'm kind of trembling, but my question is a bit short, and I'm gonna focus it more on the Moroccan aspect, since you are here on Moroccan soil, and it is with great pleasure that me as a Moroccan fan, welcome you here in our country. My question is as following. Are there any aspects of Moroccan art, cinema, or culture that you find particularly intriguing or influential? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Every time I come to Morocco, which is, very, very rare. I mean, I've only been to Morocco a handful of times. The first time to work with Jim Jarmusch in Tangier, and then I've been to this beautiful festival 3 times. That's it. So let's face it, my experience of Morocco is, nascent. But every time I come, I want to come back and this is something that I saw yesterday when I was in the Medina and I was looking at this old house and I was thinking about to live in a non-figurative architecture is really fascinating for us Northern Europeans. And I would like to sink into that more and to feel what that does to the spirit and what that does to the human artist. So that I'm very intrigued by. But yeah, it's very, very good you asked me that question, because it was only yesterday that I got a little booster jet of it, and I thought, I want to come back and dig into that.
Hi. We all know that Wes Anderson's cinema is different. It's so special by the environment he creates. So my question is, how does it feel to be a part of his works?
you're right. It's very distinct. I mean, it's distinct in a way that every filmmaker is distinct, but it's distinctly distinct. He works in a really, no surprise, I'm sure, works in an incredibly precise way. And I've worked with him now several times, I think maybe 5 times, but twice I've worked with him when the previous film was an animation. And something happens to Wes when he's just made an animation. He gets even more precise. And it is it's quite a trip to work with him. So if we were shooting now, he could easily say, cut, and then he could come to me and he could say, Tilda, when you hold the microphone, I want you to have your finger like that. And then we do it again. And then he might say, okay, on the next take, I'd like you to do it exactly the same, but I'd like you to put your feet like that. And then you do it again. He has the film in his head very precisely before. In fact, he works with an animated, like an animated, what's the word? My brain's storyboard, an animated storyboard. And he does all the voices. Kind of amazing. I think I'm always telling him he should release them because they're artworks. And so it's a very particular thing to just step in. It's like literally putting on clothes that are made on somebody else's body, and you wear them, and then they tell you how to walk. It sounds really dull, but it isn't. It's really interesting. It's because the task is to go with all that architecture and then try and make it live. So the more he packs on you, the feet and the finger and the voice and everything, the more detail he packs on you. If you're me, I mean, I like the challenge of that. And so then you go, okay, I've got to do this, but I've got to make it feel alive. And it's tough, but it's very, very interesting. He's a master. I mean, to make not just one world, but to continue to make a world. I know that there are people who are sort of alienated by the repetition of his rhythm. But I think it's extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary, and nobody complained about Monet doing those water lilies over and over again.
It's a great honor to speak with you, Tilda. Thank you for coming. I have a 2-part question. First of all, is there an underappreciated movie that you've been in or been part of that you'd like more people to see? And the second question is that what do you have to say for people who have made small-scale independent movies and would like to transition to a bigger scale of kind of movies? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Off the top of my head, this film I mentioned just now, Julia by Eric Zonka, has not been seen. You know, for those filmmakers here who have had releases, you know that getting the film made in the first place is one thing, but getting it seen is a whole nother story. And we do struggle, all of us in independent cinema now, with distribution. And we have to really think about how to improve this. That film fell between the cracks in a certain way for whatever reason. And so I would love more people to see that film. And the transitioning, well, I'm going to say something which may feel a little marshmallow, but I really mean it. Just find the people, find the right people. I said earlier, they do exist. You know, there are really intelligent, really cine-literate people working in all areas of the city of cinema. You just have to go to the house and you have to find a way to make an alliance with somebody who you feel you can be yourself with. And they will exist. And I suppose it means a lot of conversations, a lot of meetings, and if you find someone who you feel safe with and you feel that you don't have to leave yourself outside with, then stick to them like glue, and then you can build your tribe. They will be there, but you have to, you know, go on a hunt.
Hello, my name is Shifa. I'm a boxer. I came all the way from Ujda, 1,000 kilometers to be here.
Wow.
I'm very glad to be here, to be in this festival. So I've watched many of your movies, Constantine, Lovers Left Alive, and The Beach. I really liked that one. So my question is, which movie has had the most impact on your life? Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. So welcome and good travels home. That's a strange question. I mean, it's a reasonable question, but it's a difficult question to answer because I don't know the impact on my life. Two films I want to mention. The first film I would mention Orlando because that was the first film in which I had the privilege to be in every frame. When you're in every frame of a film, it goes back to being a writer. It gives you the opportunity to build the relationship between the audience and the film. You can build it very slowly and in a various way because you have many opportunities. You have many, and in particular that film, I don't know if you've seen that film, but we wanted that. It's about someone who comes to the present moment but lives for 400 years. And so we wanted it to be modern, even in 1600s, 1700s, 1800s. And we devised this thing of me looking into the camera to talk to the audience. And so that was really an opportunity for me to get used to, or to find out that I love that part of it. I love building a relationship with the film, that we are hand in hand, the film and me. I mean, when you play when you're there for less time, let's say, it's a different skill. It does involve skill because it involves kind of jumping in to the pool that's already been set by other people. And you have to kind of hit it at the right angle and then you hop out again. And I've done that. To be honest with you, it's not really what I'm for. I think it's fine, and I've enjoyed it occasionally. But I think building a film from the very beginning with the filmmaker and really kind of filling the frame in a meticulous way is what I'm really enjoy. And Orlando was the first. And I would have to mention The Eternal Daughter, which is the last film I made, because that fulfilled all the promise that Orlando, to me, all the promise that Orlando gave me about the real satisfaction, about bringing all my spirit to the frame of the entire film.
Cameraman has a question.
Hello. What it was like working with Jim Jarmusch. Jim is a great friend of mine. I adore him for all the reasons that you all adore him. The first time I saw Stranger Than Paradise, I was a student, I think, and it was such a radical moment for me because it felt to me like this was a European film made in America. And it was before I'd even been to America, and I didn't realize that my tribe lived in America too. I had a very sort of reduced idea of what American cinema was. I mean, of course, I was brought up on Stan Brakhage and an experimental world, but for narrative cinema, to have the kind of spirit that Jim Jarmusch's cinema does was really an eye-opener for me. I talked about filmmakers being primarily painters. He's a musician, and working with him is like working with a musician, and you kind of jam together. I love him very much.
Just là.
Hello. Hello. It's beyond an honor and a privilege to speak before you, Miss Swinton. Coming back to your work, The Maybe, that you spoke of earlier, you spoke of the element of dream and sleep, but I feel like there's a real strength in observation there. And you were talking about how you dislike the word actor and performance. So can you talk to me about how it is to be observed as an actor, pardon for the term, an artist, and a human being shed of both skins if one really can shed them? Thank you.
Great question, thank you. The thing about the maybe, when I made the maybe, which was the piece When I Sleep in the Glass Case, it was a response to something very profound in my life, which was not only the death of Derek Jarman, but also many, many of my friends from AIDS. And I was 33 in 1994 when I went to 43 funerals of my friends. This was a big, big, big moment for us. And I think one of the first sort of impulses that grew the maybe was I was so over sitting beside my dying friends. And I started to imagine what it would be to give a living, healthy, sleeping, not dying, but sleeping body to a public space. And the thing about it being in a glass case is that you can choose your distance. You can come very, very close and you can see me and you can see all the sort of hairs up my nose and you can see my ears. Or you can stand at the back of the room and you can see it like you're seeing me now, like a kind of, you know, on a cinema screen very far back. And that for me was a very cinematic gesture. It's one of the things I love about cinema, that the cinema can choose, you know, the scrutiny, the level of scrutiny. So that was, it was a turning point for me because Derek had died. This way of working I described had gone, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I wanted to make an experiment that was half live performance, which I love, by the way. I really, really value live performance. Although I'm not in love with the theater, because I think I would want to come closer than you are now, and that feeling of the sort of rigor of the space is always something a little limited for me. But I can't remember your second question or the evolution of your question, but I think the maybe really sums up a bit of a quest for me for something that is really non-performed, but alive, and that you can scrutinize. You know, the way on the screen you can look at an unwatched face, particularly a non-performer. This is one of the reasons I love documentaries so much. You see someone who's never seen themselves on a screen, so they're not pushing anything out at us, and you're watching them. You're watching them really closely. I love that. That was a good ruse, wasn't it, to hold a piece of paper?
Thank you. I just want to say it's such a great moment to grow up with the ice intimidating Narnia Queen, and now fast forward to the very warm and endearing TILDA Swinton. I have a two-part question. So it regards the Guadagnino's Amore. So you spoke earlier about your love of frame, democracy of frame, and the rhythm. So that movie specifically has a love of pace, sensuality, and music. So my question is, how was your experience with the frame, with the closeness in that specific movie? And was there any influence with the musical word in that movie? And the second question would be, what was the last movie that moved you, and who, and the director that you reached out to? Thank you.
There's a very funny story about it's like a cautionary tale about the music in I Am Love, because while we were shooting I Am Love, Luca and I were listening a lot to the work of John Adams. And at that point, John Adams had never provided no one had used his music in a film. He hadn't written anything for the cinema. And we became infatuated by this music as a sort of inner soundtrack for the film as we shot. And then the point came when we would be shooting. I remember one day we were doing a shot of me walking down a street, and Luca was kind of queuing up the music from John Adams, from, I don't know, Nixon in China or some incredible work. And I had a little earpiece and I was listening to the music, and we did a couple of takes, and then I said to him, hang on, isn't this a little dangerous? We are literally making this film to this soundtrack, but we don't have the rights to the music. What are we going to do when he says no? Or when we can't afford it? So I had a friend, and we thought, how can we get to John Adams? And it was such a tiny film, and we were you know, and it's a film about rich people, but we had no money. And I had a friend in San Francisco who I thought might know John Adams, and so wrote the letter, always write the letters, and I wrote to him, and he knew John Adams, and asked John Adams, and John Adams came to London and saw a screening, and Luca and I sat behind him, and he loved it, and he said, you can have any music you want, and so we did this kind of cut and paste. So working with music is actually something I'm very used to. I like it very much, especially if it's the music that you're going to be able to use in the film. And what was your other question? Have I written to someone lately?
Yeah, the last movie that moved you and thus you reached out to.
Oh, Lord. God, I know there's an answer here, but I can't remember. The last person I reached out to. Can't remember. I'll get back to you later. Sorry. I leave tomorrow morning. I'll get back to you during the day. Yeah, I can't remember. Sorry.
We only have time for one more question, I'm afraid. In the middle, half standing.
Hello. Ms. Swinton, thank you so much for being an artist, and thank you for your art. If you were going to have a cinema that you programmed yourself, who's the first female filmmaker that you would do a retrospective of?
Oh, wow. I have to say Joanna Hogg. But let's choose somebody else as well. I would say, because she's a filmmaker to me, very valued, Lillian Gish. I would mount an enormous Lillian Gish retrospective. I was thinking of her the other day because I had the great good fortune when the first time I ever went to Cannes with Derek Jarman, so I suppose it was something like 1989 or something, and Lindsay Anderson's Whales of August was presented, and we were allowed to go to the screening, and we were right up in the gods, the back of the cinema, and she was 90, I think, Lillian Gish, and she came onto the stage, and she was wearing something very white, and she was tiny, and the light sort of bleached her out. She was like Tinkerbell. She just came onto the stage and hovered there for a minute, and then left. And for, you know, my first love was silent cinema always, I mean, Buster Keaton in particular, but Lillian Gish, I think, and knowing her as a filmmaker, as a producer, as an author in cinema, was an early example and inspiration for me.
I will invite you to do that retrospective, the Cinematheque in Toronto.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Thank you so much. I have a couple of people I have to thank. I would like to thank Jacqueline, who ran the clips for us. I'd like to thank Olivia for her help, Xavier, and Masume, who was doing live translation during this entire time. Thank you so much. But first and foremost, thank you so much for your generous answers and elegance, Tilda. Thank you.
Thank you so much.